who I'm voting for and why I think they might do the same.
The man who saved Princess Leia, who found the lost Ark, who became the face of adventure for millions of people around the world, now sits quietly on his ranch in Wyoming. At 83 years old, Harrison Ford has everything money can buy, but the painful truth is that some of life's deepest wounds can never be healed by fame or fortune. Today, we're going to talk about the heartbreaking reality behind one of Hollywood's biggest legends. You see Harrison Ford on screen as Han Solo or Indiana Jones, and you think this guy has it all figured out. He's tough, he's cool, he always saves the day. But the real Harrison Ford has faced tragedies that would break most people. From childhood struggles that almost destroyed him before he even started, to marriages that fell apart under the crushing weight of fame, to watching his own body betray him in ways that no movie script could ever prepare him for. This isn't just another celebrity story. This is the story of a man who conquered the world but lost pieces of himself along the way. So stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why Harrison Ford's life is both inspiring and absolutely heartbreaking at the same time. Let's start at the very beginning, back when Harrison Ford wasn't a movie star at all. He was just a scared little kid growing up in Chicago in the 1940s. You might think that someone who would become so famous and confident was always that way, but you'd be completely wrong. Young Harrison was actually painfully shy, so shy that it felt like a prison he couldn't escape from. His parents were both involved in entertainment. His dad was sometimes an actor, and his mom used to sing on the radio. You'd think this would help him feel more comfortable, but it actually made things worse. Harrison felt like he was supposed to be outgoing and talented like his parents, but instead he was the kid who odd in corners at school, watching other children play while he stayed invisible. He later said that he felt like he didn't fit in anywhere. Think about how hard that must have been for a little boy. Going to school every day, feeling like you don't belong with anyone. Having a Jewish mother and an Irish Catholic father gave him a mixed identity that made him feel even more out of place. He was caught between two worlds and felt at home in neither. By the time Harrison was a teenager, his shyness had turned into something even worse. His grades were terrible, not because he wasn't smart, but because he was so uncomfortable in his own skin that he couldn't focus on anything. When he went to college in Wisconsin, things got even harder. He was studying philosophy and failing miserably. He felt lost, invisible, and completely defeated. But sometimes life has a funny way of surprising us. In his final year of college, Harrison signed up for a drama class. He didn't do it because he wanted to be an actor. He did it because he was desperate. It was like a last attempt to break free from the cage of silence that had trapped him his whole life. Something magical happened when he got on that stage. For the first time in his life, the invisible boy felt seen. The voice that had been buried under years of fear finally had a place to come out. It wasn't easy, and he was still terrified, but he had found something that felt like home. This discovery changed everything for Harrison, but it also set him up for years of heartbreak that were still to come. After college, Harrison packed up his old car and drove to Hollywood in 1964. He was 22 years old with big dreams and almost no money. Columbia Pictures gave him a contract for $150 a week, which seemed like a lot of money to a broke kid from Chicago. But the reality of Hollywood was much crueler than he had imagined. For years, Harrison got tiny parts in movies where he barely had any lines. He would show up to auditions and directors would decide he wasn't right for the role before he even opened his mouth. The rejection was constant and brutal. He later said that he would walk into audition rooms and know immediately that he had no chance. But here's where Harrison's story gets even more complicated. During this time, he got married to his college girlfriend, Mary. Soon they had 2 children together. Suddenly, Harrison wasn't just a struggling actor trying to follow his dreams. He was a husband and father who needed to put food on the table and keep a roof over his family's head. Dreams don't pay bills, and Harrison learned this the hard way. He taught himself carpentry and started building cabinets and fixing things for people in Hollywood. Every day he would swing a hammer and sand wood, knowing that each piece of furniture he made was another day away from his real dream of acting. He said later that carpentry paid the bills but broke his spirit. Can you imagine how that must have felt? Every table he built, every door he fixed, it probably felt like he was building a coffin for his dreams. He was in his 20s and 30s, watching other actors become famous while he remained invisible. The worst part was watching his children's faces. They were too young to understand why Daddy was always stressed about money or why he came home covered in sawdust instead of excitement from a movie set. Harrison felt like a failure as both an actor and as a father, even though he was working harder than most people ever will. By the early 1970s, Harrison was in his 30s and starting to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. All around him, actors his age were getting famous while he was still fixing kitchen cabinets. He felt like he had no business calling himself an actor anymore. But sometimes when you're at your lowest point, that's exactly when life decides to surprise you. In 1973, a young director named George Lucas gave Harrison a small part in a movie called American Graffiti. It wasn't a big role, but it proved that Harrison could actually act when given the chance. Still, he kept working as a carpenter because one small movie role wasn't enough to support his family. Then something incredible happened. George Lucas was working on a strange space movie that nobody thought would be successful. He needed someone to read lines with the other actors during auditions, and he remembered Harrison from American Graffiti. So Harrison showed up, not to audition for a part, but just to help other actors practice their lines. But while he was reading the lines of this character named Han Solo, something clicked. George Lucas saw something special in Harrison's performance. The rest, as they say, is history. When Star Wars came out in 1977, Harrison Ford went from being a nobody carpenter to one of the most famous people in the world almost overnight. Han Solo wasn't just a character, he was a cultural phenomenon. Harrison's smirky, confident performance made him an instant icon. Then came Indiana Jones in 1981, and Harrison's status as a legend was sealed forever. He became the face of adventure for an entire generation. Kids around the world wanted to be like Indiana Jones, with his fedora hat and whip, always ready to save the day. But here's the heartbreaking irony of Harrison's success. The fame that saved his career destroyed his personal life. Mary, his wife who had supported him through all those years of struggle, suddenly found herself married to one of the most famous men in the world. The quiet life they had built together was shattered by the constant attention of fans and reporters. Harrison was always traveling for movies, always busy with interviews and photo shoots. Mary had believed in Harrison when nobody else would. She had worked to support the family while he chased his dreams. She had endured years of poverty and uncertainty. But now that the dream had come true, she discovered that success could be just as painful as failure. The rumors about Harrison having an affair with his Star Wars co-star Carrie Fisher made everything worse. Whether it was true or not, Mary felt like she was losing her husband to a world she never asked to be part of. By 1979, their marriage was over after 15 years together. The divorce was devastating for everyone, especially their two sons. They had to watch their family fall apart just as their father was becoming the biggest movie star in the world. For Mary, it was the cruelest kind of heartbreak. She had sacrificed everything to help Harrison achieve his dreams, and those same dreams had taken him away from her. Harrison has rarely talked about Mary in interviews over the years. Maybe it's because every memory of her reminds him of what he lost on his way to the top. After his divorce from Mary, Harrison thought he had learned from his mistakes. In 1983, he married Melissa Matheson, a talented writer who had worked on movies like E.T. With Melissa, he felt like he had found someone who understood the entertainment business and could handle the pressures of his fame. For a while, it seemed like Harrison had finally found his happy ending. He and Melissa had 2 children together, Malcolm and Georgia. Their house was filled with laughter and love, and Harrison felt like he finally had the family life he had always wanted. But tragedy has a way of finding Harrison Ford, even in his happiest moments. When Georgia was still young, she was diagnosed with epilepsy. Suddenly, the man who played indestructible heroes on screen felt completely powerless in real life. Harrison watched his little daughter suffer from seizures, and there was nothing he could do to protect her. The helplessness was unbearable. Harrison was used to solving problems, to fighting his way out of difficult situations. But epilepsy isn't a villain you can punch or outsmart. It's a medical condition that attacks without warning, and no amount of money or fame can make it go away. In desperation, Harrison did something that showed just how much he loved his daughter. He auctioned off his iconic Han Solo jacket, one of the most important pieces of movie history, just to raise money for epilepsy research. To the world, it looked like a generous donation. To Harrison, it felt like begging the universe to save his child. Melissa handled George's illness with incredible strength, but the stress of having a sick child, combined with Harrison's demanding career, started to wear down their marriage. Harrison was constantly traveling for movies, and Melissa was left to handle most of George's care by herself. Even though Melissa was successful in her own right as a writer, she felt increasingly isolated. She was married to one of the most famous men in the world, but she often felt alone. The man millions of people adored was often absent from his own home. By 2004, after more than 20 years of marriage, Harrison and Melissa divorced. The settlement was worth $85 million, which made headlines, but the real cost couldn't be measured in money. It was another family broken, another set of children who had to watch their parents' love fall apart. But the worst tragedy was still to come. In 2015, Melissa was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. Within months, she was gone at only 65 years old. Harrison was remarried by then to another woman, but Melissa's death hit him like a truck. People who knew Harrison said he looked like a different person after Melissa died. He became quieter, more withdrawn. The confident swagger that had made him famous seemed to fade. Melissa hadn't just been his ex-wife, she had been the mother of his children and the witness to his rise from carpenter to movie star. Her death was a reminder that no matter how tough Harrison looked on screen, he was just a man who could be broken by loss like anyone else. But Harrison's heartbreaks weren't limited to his marriages. There was also the brief but intense affair he had with Carrie Fisher, his Star Wars co-star, back in 1976. Harrison was 34 and married with children. Carrie was only 19, brilliant and beautiful, but also vulnerable and searching for her place in the world. During the filming of the first Star Wars movie, they began a secret relationship that lasted about 3 months. For Harrison, Carrie represented an escape from the responsibilities and pressures of his life. For Carrie, Harrison was like gravity itself, solid, mysterious, and completely magnetic, but both of them knew it couldn't last. When filming ended, so did their relationship. They kept the secret for 40 years. Nobody knew about their affair until 2016 when Carrie finally wrote about it in her memoir. She didn't write about it with anger or bitterness, but with a kind of wistful sadness, like she was finally letting go of a ghost that had haunted her for decades. Harrison, true to his private nature, said almost nothing when the story came out. But then came the cruelest twist of all. In December 2016, just months after revealing their long-ago affair, Carrie Fisher died suddenly at the age of 60. For millions of fans, it was the loss of Princess Leia, the rebel who had inspired generations to fight for what they believed in. For Harrison, it was something much more personal. It was the loss of someone who had known him not as Han Solo or Indiana Jones, but just as a man, someone who had seen him before he became a legend, when he was still figuring out who he was supposed to be. Harrison's statement about Carrie's death was typically brief. He said she was one of a kind, brilliant, original, funny, but people who knew him understood that his grief ran much deeper than those few words could express. After so much heartbreak and loss, most people would have given up on love entirely. But Harrison Ford has always been stubborn, and in the early 2000s, his stubbornness finally paid off in the best possible way. At a Golden Globe party in 2002, Harrison met Callista Flockhart, the star of the TV show Ally McBeal. She was younger, successful, and known for her quick wit and delicate beauty. He was a grizzled legend in his 60s, carrying the weight of 2 failed marriages and a lifetime of public attention. But when they looked at each other, something simple and genuine passed between them. Harrison said later that it wasn't her fame that attracted him, but her kindness and warmth. After decades in Hollywood, he had learned to tell the difference between people who wanted to be around Harrison Ford, the movie star, and people who actually cared about Harrison Ford, the man. With Callista, it was different from his earlier relationships. He was older and wiser now. He understood that real love isn't about passion and drama, it's about finding someone who makes the noise of the world fade away. Callista had an adopted son named Liam, and Harrison embraced the boy as his own. This gave Harrison a chance to be the kind of father he had always wanted to be, present, patient, and fully committed to his family's happiness. In 2010, Harrison and Callista got married in a small, private ceremony in New Mexico. There were no reporters, no big Hollywood production, just two people choosing each other. Soon after, they moved to a ranch in Wyoming, far away from the craziness of Hollywood. For the first time in decades, Harrison was able to live quietly. He traded red carpets for horseback rides, movie premieres for evenings by the fire. The sounds that filled his home weren't from paparazzi cameras, but from Liam's laughter and Callista's voice. When Harrison suffered his plane crash in 2015, Callista simply stayed by his side. She didn't give dramatic interviews to the press or make his accident about herself. She just loved him through the fear and the recovery. When someone asked her later how she handled it, she gave the simplest, most powerful answer possible: "I love him." That's perhaps the most important thing to understand about this chapter of Harrison's life. After decades of relationships complicated by fame, ambition, and tragedy, he finally found something rare and precious: a love based on presence and consistency rather than passion and drama. Today, Harrison and Callista's marriage stands out in Hollywood because it's so normal and stable. For Harrison, who had spent so many years losing the people he loved, Callista represents something he had almost given up hoping for: a safe place to rest. But even with love and stability in his personal life, Harrison Ford faces perhaps the cruelest enemy of all: time itself. For decades, Harrison built his reputation on being indestructible. He was the guy who did his own stunts, who refused to let a stunt double take his place. If Indiana Jones was going to hang from a truck or fight on top of a moving train, Harrison insisted it had to be him doing it. This stubbornness made his movies more exciting and authentic, but it also left his body covered in scars that no camera ever showed. Torn muscles, cracked bones, joints that never quite healed right. By the time Harrison reached his 70s, every step he took carried the weight of decades of punishment. Still, he kept pushing himself. He believed that if audiences were going to believe in his characters, they had to see him, not some younger stunt double doing the dangerous stuff. Then came June 2014, and everything changed. Harrison was on the set of Star Wars, The Force Awakens, inside the Millennium Falcon, the spaceship that had made him famous nearly 40 years earlier. A heavy hydraulic door malfunctioned and came crashing down on his leg, pinning him underneath the very symbol of his movie career. The irony was devastating. Han Solo, the pilot who had outrun the Empire, was broken by his own ship. The set fell silent as Harrison was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. For the first time, the illusion of indestructibility was shattered, and everyone could see that behind the legend was just a man who could be hurt like anyone else. Harrison recovered and even joked about the accident later on talk shows, but something had changed. He had been forced to confront the fact that his body, which had carried him through so many adventures, was no longer young and unbreakable. Just 1 year later, the illusion cracked even wider. In March 2015, Harrison was flying one of his vintage planes when the engine failed. The aircraft crashed into a golf course in Los Angeles, and for several terrifying hours, the world thought it might lose Harrison Ford forever. Callista later admitted that she lived those hours in absolute terror, not knowing if her husband would survive. The crash was a brutal reminder that Harrison's love of flying, which had always been his escape from the pressures of fame, could also be the thing that took him away from the people who loved him. He survived, but the accident left him changed. The man who had always seemed fearless now had to acknowledge that he was mortal, that his body could fail, that even legends can be broken. In 2021, at nearly 80 years old, Harrison tore his shoulder while filming a fight scene for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Production had to be shut down for weeks while he underwent surgery and rehabilitation. the man who had once seemed tireless now needed time to heal. When he finally returned to the set, everyone could see the truth. He was moving more slowly, more carefully. His face showed the lines and weathering of 8 decades of life. But when the director called action, something in Harrison still came alive. For a few hours, he was Indiana Jones again, defying time with every crack of the whip. These physical struggles reveal the deepest tragedy of Harrison Ford's later years. The roles that made him immortal on screen were slowly destroying the man who played them. Every scar, every surgery, every slow morning when his joints reminded him of his age, they were all payments on a debt he had been accumulating for decades. But here's what makes Harrison's story so remarkable. Even as his body has betrayed him, his spirit remains unbroken. He continues to work, continues to fly, continues to push himself, because that's simply who he is. The same stubbornness that got him hurt is also what keeps him going. At 83 years old, Harrison Ford has a net worth of over $300 million. He owns homes in Los Angeles and New York, a massive ranch in Wyoming, vintage planes, luxury cars, and more possessions than most people could ever dream of. By any measure, he has won the game of life. But the man himself has never lived more quietly or simply. On his Wyoming ranch, Harrison has found a kind of peace that fame never gave him. He wakes up each day not to the sound of cameras and reporters, but to the silence of mountains and open sky. He tends to his land, spends time with Callista and Liam, and finally has learned how to be present in his own life. The Hollywood world that once consumed him now feels very far away. He still makes movies occasionally, still shows up for important premieres, but most of his days are spent in the simple rhythms of ranch life. After decades of performing for the world, he has finally learned how to just be himself. In many ways, this quiet chapter of Harrison's life is the most beautiful. The man who spent so many years absent from his own family due to work and fame has finally learned how to stay still, to listen, to be there for the people who matter most. But even in this peaceful setting, the weight of the past is never completely gone. Harrison carries the memory of Mary, the wife who supported him through his early struggles only to lose him to success. He carries the grief of Melissa's death, the woman who shared his rise to fame and bore his children. He carries the bittersweet memory of Carrie Fisher, the brief love affair that lasted only months but left echoes for decades. He also carries the complicated relationships with his older children, the sons who grew up watching their father become famous while feeling like they were losing him. Though Harrison has worked to rebuild those relationships over the years, the guilt of being an absent father during crucial years of their lives is something that probably haunts him still. And of course, he carries the daily reminders of his own mortality, the aches and pains that come with age, the slower movements, the careful way he has to get up from chairs, all reminders that even Han Solo and Indiana Jones grow old. When Harrison appeared at the premiere of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny in 2023, something remarkable happened. As he walked onto the stage, the entire audience rose in thunderous applause. But it wasn't just celebration. It was farewell. You could see it in Harrison's eyes. This wasn't just the end of another movie. This was goodbye to a character that had defined his life for over 40 years. When he spoke to the audience, his voice was unsteady with emotion. "I'm deeply moved," he said, and you could tell that he was saying goodbye not just to Indiana Jones, but to a whole era of his life. That moment captured the bittersweet reality of Harrison Ford's current situation. He has achieved everything an actor could dream of achieving, but time doesn't care about your accomplishments. It takes everyone eventually, even legends. Yet Harrison continues to find ways to give back. As vice chair of Conservation International, he has used his wealth and fame to protect forests and rivers around the world. He has donated large portions of his Wyoming ranch to conservation efforts, ensuring that those wild places will remain long after he's gone. He has also quietly used his piloting skills to help with real rescue operations, ferrying lost hikers and stranded climbers to safety. This kind of heroism, unfilmed, uncelebrated, but absolutely real, might be the most authentic role Harrison Ford has ever played. What makes Harrison Ford's story so compelling isn't just the triumphs, but the way he has handled the tragedies. He has faced rejection, divorce, death, physical pain, and the slow losses that come with aging. Each one could have broken him, but instead they have shaped him into something more genuine than any movie character. The boy who was once too shy to speak has become a man whose silence carries more weight than most people's words. The carpenter who once felt like a failure has built a life that matters not just because of the movies he made, but because of the forests he has protected, the lives he has saved, and the love he has finally learned to sustain. At 83, Harrison Ford is not the indestructible hero of his youth. He's something more valuable, a man who has endured enough heartbreak to understand what really matters, who has lived long enough to move past the need for applause, who has grown wise enough to choose presence over performance. His legacy isn't just Han Solo's smirk or Indiana Jones's whip. It's the proof that even when life breaks you, even when your body fails and your heart gets shattered, you can still choose to keep going. You can still choose love over bitterness, generosity over selfishness, hope over despair. The tragedy of Harrison Ford isn't that he has suffered. It's that he has suffered so much and still remained fundamentally decent. He has every reason to be angry or bitter, but instead he has chosen to be grateful. He has every excuse to retreat from the world, but instead he continues to show up. In the end, maybe that's what makes someone a real hero. Not the ability to escape danger or solve every problem, but the courage to face heartbreak and keep your heart open anyway. To accept that you're mortal and fragile and still dare to love people who you know you'll eventually lose. Harrison Ford has given us decades of entertainment, but his greatest gift might be this final lesson. That growing old with grace and dignity. That loving people despite the certainty of loss. That choosing hope in the face of heartbreak. These are the real adventures that matter. That's Harrison Ford's story. Not just the legend, but the man. Scarred, weathered, but still standing. Still flying. Still choosing love over fear. Presence over performance. Hope over heartbreak. If this story moved you, if Harrison Ford's journey touched something in your heart, I want you to do me a favor. Hit that like button to honor this incredible man's legacy. Share this video with someone who grew up loving Han Solo or Indiana Jones, because they deserve to know the real story behind the characters they admired. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel because there are so many more stories like this one. Stories of real people behind the Hollywood magic. Stories of triumph and heartbreak. Stories that remind us what it really means to be human. Harrison Ford's journey isn't over yet, and neither is ours. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.